Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Steve Burkett. I'm an EV educator and advocate with Plug and Play EV. Welcome to the New York International Auto Show. I'm very glad to be joined here by John Markowitz, head of e-mobility with New York Power Authority. And we're going to have a chat about EV charging and infrastructure in New York. So welcome, John. Can you tell us a bit about your role?
Thanks. Yeah, and at New York Power Authority, we've been actively involved in EV infrastructure for 25 years. It's one of the oldest utility programs in the States. And it started in our R&D group. Doing some of the really earliest EV charging installs around the state, charging for state and local government fleets, everything from light-duty vehicles all the way up to big transit buses. And then we hit a point, in 2018 where we said, well, the state has all these EV adoption goals, but if you're driving a non-Tesla EV from, say, like Long Island to Buffalo, it's an 8-hour drive, and there are no dots on the map where you can stop for a fast charger. Like, this is not a possible trip. Like, how would this ever happen? And we just didn't see the private sector stepping in and building this stuff out. So we said, as a state actor, maybe we need to be the first one in the pool, build some of these fast chargers, get people comfortable enough that they could make the road trip to, the Adirondacks or to Buffalo. Yeah, I know this is something you know a lot about.
I was going to say, it's been more than 3 years now since I did that first charge session on your Evolve New York site in LaGrangeville. So, everybody wants to hear how the network has progressed in that time. It's been a busy period. Can you give us an update of where we are?
Yeah, LaGrangeville, first site, 2020. Opened it up during COVID. That was really a challenge, getting electricians to the site and following all the safety protocols, all that. Got it open, operational. To this day, it's the only fast charging on the Taconic Parkway, that whole route from here up to Albany, on the western or eastern side of the river. So we're proud of that, to filling gaps in roads where nobody else is serving them. Same thing's true of the Northway from Albany up to Quebec. Same thing's true with the exception of one fast charger all the way from New York City to Buffalo on that southern route, that Route 17. We have multiple dots, just filling in those gaps, because you really need these things every 50 miles or so, just like the Fed said. And that was our vision years ago, every 50 miles or so, have these dots. And I know you travel often to go to the Midwest, so you depend on this.
Yeah, it's night and day now, since when there was nothing that you couldn't get from the 300 miles from Albany to Buffalo in those early days. And I also know, from the state point of view, you being an EV driver yourself, you obviously know those routes are necessary, right? So no one else was electrifying the Adirondacks, the Northway, those kind of locations, and that's where Evolve New York's progress has stepped in.
And it's what I forget the phrase, was it minimal but necessary kind of thing? When people buy an EV, the first question is, okay, can I get to X? Whatever that destination is, grandma's, right? Vacation home, whatever it is. And it doesn't matter that that's a frequently traveled roadway or not, right? Like we're putting fast chargers in the Adirondacks because we know it's a tourist destination, right? It might only get used certain times of the year, but there are people who will look at the map and say, all right, there's not a fast charger between here and Lake Placid. I'm not going to buy the car. Right? So that's the key point.
And we've talked a little bit about where we've gone and the locations, but what kind of numbers are we seeing from Evolve New York as we enter 2024?
We have 43 sites open. Typical site has 4 chargers, but we're building out 6s, 8s, 10s, and LaGuardia will be a 12. But typical sites, 4 chargers. It's at a convenience store somewhere along the interstate, in the capital region. It's Stewart's. Central New York, it's Marabito's, is a gas station chain. And we'll put 4 of these machines there. So our current count is 170 chargers. The goal is to get to 400. And that'll fill out the map in the state, and then we're hoping the private sector jumps in with both feet at that point and builds out the additional ones we need.
I can attest to the value of Stewart's as well, with my kids loving their ice cream, so there's a big plug for them there. Big pluck. So you've mentioned a little bit there the connection to EV adoption. People needing to feel confident in the EV infrastructure.
So there's two pieces in solving that piece of the problem. One is level 2 charging, right? Like those cars are still parked overnight somewhere, right? Or if it's a commuter, they still park it all day at some workplace. So that's why, like, the work we're doing with City DOT, putting level 2 charging in all these commuter lots all over is essential, right? But you need a mix of that and fast charging, because the other use case that's really common in the city that's changing wildly in the last few years is taxis and rideshare. Right, so like our JFK site, when we built it, it was really quiet. There's 10 chargers, like biggest on the East Coast for several months, and then all of a sudden the taxis and the rideshares start electrifying, right? They're under a mandate to do so. So right now we have 10,000 electric taxis, rideshare. The number of licenses is 13,000. So soon we'll be going from 10 to 13,000 in like no time, in just a few months. So now the JFK site is just slammed, right? We've gone from 100 sessions a day to 200. And we can't build LaGuardia fast enough. And the hard part about building this stuff is the grid connection, right? Like, you can get a construction crew out there, and if the weather cooperates, you could build all this stuff up. But just getting, like, the utility connections are the same thing as building a small to mid-size office building. Right, so it's not trivial, kind of construction, but like just getting all that planned and built is just a big challenge now.
And on that score, you're getting some support now from, obviously these things cost money. It's not cheap to put in 4 of these and the power that they take. What kind of support have you receiving from federal funding and other sources?
Yeah, it basically, like, if you look at building fast charging and the business of it, it's incredibly challenging. It like, even if you sell the electricity for, like, say, double the cost you buy it for, reselling electricity is just a tough business. The equipment's expensive, the construction's expensive, maintaining it, all these things add up your expenses. Then utilities charge based on how fast, right, you consume the electricity, and that is discriminatory against this kind of hardware, right? Because the driver just wants to know, can I plug in, and by the time I'm done eating my sandwich, can I continue my road trip, right? That means really high rates of electricity consumption. So we had to change the landscape on how utilities are regulated, right, so that this could be a little friendlier to this kind of business. So that was one source of revenue that, or relief that we had to bring in to make this possible. We had Make Ready passed, which is a utility regulation where the utility basically chips in and helps pay the connection to bring the power to your chargers, right? Because that could be cost prohibitive, that piece. So that's a major state program, Make Ready. So those were the state pieces that helped, finance this, besides for our own money. But then recently it was the Federal Infrastructure Act money, right? The NEVI program, it's called. And we partnered with State DOT, and basically they're going to give us federal funding up to $20 million to fill in the remaining gaps with our program, so that the state is in compliance with the federal minimum, which is a fast charging hub every 50 miles along all your major interstates. So New York, because of our program, was already a little ahead of the game, and we only had 20 dots on the map to fill to meet that federal requirement, whereas other states our size had a long way to go, dozens and dozens of sites. So that was a huge win for us and for State DOT to try to hit these goals faster.
It also speaks to the strategic planning of the team, really, because, as you said, they have to be every 50 miles, they have to be on travel routes, and then they also have to be within a mile of the interstate. So the fact that you've already covered a lot of those bases shows that you are not only ahead in installations, but knowing what was going to be required from EV drivers.
And yeah, being an early mover, and then having outreach to the EV drivers and advocates was also really important, because we learned from that experience which of our sites people didn't care for because maybe the amenities nearby weren't the greatest, like the restaurant's not open that many hours, that kind of. And we took that feedback and tried to pick newer sites that had longer amenities, longer hours, just better lighting at the sites, closer to the interstate. So all those things. So when those federal standards came out, we were so familiar with them because they were basically the program design points we already had for the program. We'd already been working really closely with all the state's utilities on where is their power, so we don't have to wait 2 years for you to bring us power. And having that all mapped out. That was a huge regulatory undertaking early in the program, is we didn't want to have to ask the utility about, like, say, 3 convenience stores at a certain exit on the interstate, and we could basically partner with any of those 3. And one might be on the east side of the interstate, one might be on the west side of the interstate. We just want to know which side is there lots of power on? And then we'll pick that convenience store, build the charger there, make it easy for all of us. So we had a regulation passed where utilities had to host an online map and show us where the power is. So we wouldn't even have to bother them to figure this kind of thing out. So yeah, it's a completely different state than it was back in 2018 when we started all this.
Yep, I can attest to that. It's been much easier road tripping in the last 2 years than it was the 3 or 4 years prior. But on the subject of maps, it's important to be able to plan your routes and figure out where these chargers are. It's great having them in the ground, but where are they? How do they find them? Can you talk a little bit about how prospective EV buyers might go about figuring out what's near them?
Yeah, there's these great phone apps that do all that mapping, and some of the vehicles actually have that kind of mapping on board the vehicle, which is sort of the ideal. But for those vehicles that don't offer that feature, there's these phone apps like PlugShare is a common one, ChargeWay is another one. And you could plan your road trips out using these apps. It'll tell you how many stops you have to make, how long you have to stop at each of these things. And that's just transformational to being able to make these really long road trips, knowing where the chargers are, even knowing where chargers are coming. Like we'll post our sites, coming soon, and even our users like yourself will post to these websites and say, like, all right, I just noticed the construction crew there. Like, let's post this as a coming soon before even the people building it post it. The users will post it because they're excited because, like, wow, this opens up a new place where I could go on vacation or something. So that's huge. And then here at the show, we have this kiosk over here, a ChargeWay kiosk. And basically it's a great consumer education piece because people come to me, I'm not sure if an EV is right for me. I vacation in Florida. And we could just type in the name of the city in Florida and say, here's what your road trip would look like. It's this number of stops. This is how long it would take. Does that fit in your lifestyle or not? And then, like, here's how to plan a trip to your relatives. Like, all those use cases. And eyes just open up because they think EV charging is way harder and way longer than it is. And then there's way less of it than there actually is. So we definitely need more of it. But there's still a decent amount of it. And, like, just opening people's eyes to here are how many there are. Here are how fast they are. It's just transformational. The people who are trying to make that decision about their next car purchase.
Yeah, I think that's a key piece of confidence. But obviously, as you say, the education piece is crucial. That's why we have a massive booth behind us with educational resources. What's the New York Power Authority doing in the realm of education and helping people to figure out if an EV is right for them?
Yeah, I mean, we do this show. We do Buffalo Auto Show along with our partners at NYPA. And NYPA administers the rebate program that goes to all the dealerships. They also have a very robust consumer education website. We go to lots of grassroots events, all the Drive Electric Week kind of events. We do a few of those every year. We also do events at our power plants that have visitor centers. So they might have, like, say, a wildlife day, and we'll bring an EV, we'll bring a demo of this, like, kiosk, and we could do all this kind of driver education that, like, people might be there for a completely different event, but we'll be there telling them about the Evolve network and everything just to get that education piece out.
I can definitely recommend the Utica Power Zone up there. That's right next to the zoo. It's a good place to go for your education, and there's charges as well.
Yeah, and learn about the history of electricity and electric production and Tesla and Edison and all that history.
Absolutely. So we've heard a little bit in the mainstream media about EV demand flagging, maybe not being quite as strong as we'd hoped. New York doesn't seem to be, at least it's bucking that trend. Obviously, it's a little more ahead of the curve, as we say. But what are you seeing in terms of EV adoption in the state?
Yeah, New York's at 9%, which is just a little bit ahead of national average. So it's good. We'd like to see it way better. And I think the education's a piece of it. And infrastructure is the other piece of it. But, you look at New York and the national, and, you're going from 40 to 50% annual growth. And percentages are a bit misleading, because if you grew 40% in 2022, and then you grow another 50% in 2023, it's 50% of a bigger number, right? So in real numbers, EV adoption is accelerating. You see more and more of them on the roads. It's happening. It's just we need it to happen faster for environmental reasons.
Right, for sure. And so when we've talked about covering this day, and people looking at the maps and seeing they can go where they want to go, what other barriers, if any, do you see as kind of crucial to overcome, and where is New York in addressing those kind of barriers to adoption?
I think the big barrier is queuing at the charging stations on holiday weekends, and it's a tough thing to build, right? It's like you're building something that, on a Wednesday might not be very crowded or heavily used, but then like that July 4th weekend, there's a line of people. So basically, you have to overbuild this stuff, right? And it's not cheap to build, so you overbuild it a bit for those holiday weekends and all those use cases, and then give people options, right? So if you get to a charger and it's completely slammed with users because it is July 4th, all right, well, if I know there's another one in another 20 miles and my EV goes 300 miles and I got, I don't know, say 100 miles left, I have choices, right? I could go to the next one, take my chances. That's where we need to get as a state, and we're starting to get there.
This is a huge piece for potential site hosts as well, right? If there's all these people, a captive audience waiting to come and spend money with your business, then get those charges in the ground.
Yeah, that's a big educational part that we're working with our partners that host these things to show, and there's some academic research just getting started on what are the downstream economic benefits of hosting charging. And yeah, I mean, definitely, I've bought a lot of meals, done some shopping, all that stuff in places I normally wouldn't be, just because one of these is there. And yeah, it's on my road trip. So.
Yep. So for anyone who's looking around the booth, what would you recommend they take a look at? Anything you'd like to highlight as a kind of key piece to take away?
I think what's really exciting for us when we're in the booth is that car shopper that's sort of on the edge, trying to figure out, does it work for my lifestyle or not? They have a ton of questions about installing charging at home, charging on road trips. What are the cars and roughly what do they cost? And we're neutral. We don't care if you buy a Chevy or a Ford, just make it electric, right? So we could do all that basic education and, give them the links to all the rebate programs, websites that explain the federal tax rebate, all of that. From a neutral source, right? Utility programs. There's great utility programs that will give you a discount if you charge late at night. Giving people links to all those assets so they don't have to do all that research from scratch. Because, right now there's just not that many places that sort of pool all that consumer education together. And that's what we're trying to do in this booth, is really pool all those things together so you can hand somebody, one leaflet and it answers the questions they need to make that decision for them.
Well, it's obviously a valuable resource, and I've certainly benefited from it, as well as other people who traverse the state in EV. So thank you to the New York Power Authority team for doing that. And yeah, I guess we'll still be around afterwards if anyone wants to take questions or put one-on-one topic.